Ever come home to find an entire neighborhood built on your property without so much as a phone call? That's what I faced when the Pine Ridge HOA decided my 100-acre family land was the perfect spot for 58 cookie-cutter homes. Thinking I'd never notice, the North Carolina sun was dipping low as I rattled down the dirt road in my old pickup truck, kicking up dust on the way to my family's 100-acre plot. I'm Jack Hopper, 58, a retired engineer with a knack for fixing problems and a heart tied to this land. My grandfather passed it down over a century ago. A wild stretch of forest, fields, and a little creek fed by wetlands. I'd been away for a year, working a project out of state, and was itching to breathe that familiar pine-scented air. I pulled up to the rusted gate, my lockbox in the passenger seat holding the original deed and survey maps, proof of my family's claim. A faded private property. An "No trespassing" sign clung to the fence, half hidden by weeds. I stepped out, expecting the quiet of my untouched land. Instead, I froze, where my forest once stood. There was a sea of asphalt, manicured lawns, and 58 shiny new homes. A gaudy sign screamed, "Pine Ridge Estates, luxury living by Pine Ridge HOA." My stomach churned. This wasn't just trespassing, it was theft on a grand scale. Pulse pounding. I drove straight to a construction trailer parked on what used to be my meadow. Inside, I met Linda Grayson, mid-50s, HOA president, all polished nails and fake smiles, clutching a clipboard like a shield. The trailer was stuffed with blueprints of her precious development, and a stack of HOA violation notices sat on her desk, ready to bully anyone who stepped out of line. "Mr. Hopper, is it?" Linda said, barely looking up. "This land was annexed for community needs. Eminent domain, you know. Your absence made it abandoned." She slid a check across the desk. "A pathetic retroactive compensation that wouldn't buy a used car. Take it and move on." I pulled the deed from my lockbox, slamming it on her desk. "This says I own every inch of this land. You built a neighborhood on my property without permission." Linda smirked, unfazed. "Good luck proving that in court. We've sold half these homes already." Her arrogance lit a fire in me. This wasn't just about my land. It was about her thinking she could steamroll anyone. I walked the property that night, the glow of streetlights mocking the stars I used to see. My grandfather's fishing spot on the creek was gone, buried under culverts and concrete. Childhood memories, casting lines with him, the sound of water over rocks, felt like ghosts now. This land was more than dirt. It was my family's legacy, and Pine Ridge HOA had paved it over like it was nothing. I sat in my truck, gripping the steering wheel. Linda thought she could bury me in paperwork and court fees. She didn't know who she was dealing with. I wasn't just fighting for my 100 acres. I was fighting for every small landowner who'd ever been bullied by an HOA drunk on power. Seeing my family's land stolen right under my nose lit a fire in me. What would you do if someone built an entire neighborhood on your property without asking? Would you fight tooth and nail or take the money and run? Drop your thoughts. I'm curious how you'd handle this. Linda thought she could bury me in legal fees and red tape. She didn't know I was about to unearth every dirty secret her HOA had, and a way to wash it all away. I turned a cheap motel room on the edge of town into my war room. The kind of place where the coffee maker sputtered and the Wi-Fi flickered. But it was home base. Papers were everywhere, piled on the wobbly desk, taped to the walls, even scattered across the bed. I'd brought in Mike, a property rights attorney in his early 40s with a reputation for dismantling HOAs like a mechanic stripping a bad engine. He had a glint in his eye when I showed him my deed, like a hunter spotting his prey. We hit the county courthouse first, diving into dusty archives like prospectors panning for gold. We pulled my original deed, historical surveys from the 1920s, and every zoning map the county had on file. Each document was a brick in our case, proving my land was never annexed, never sold, never touched by any legal transfer. Pine Ridge HOA had either forged documents or bribed someone to redraw property lines. My desk groaned under a thick binder of legal documents, and my laptop glowed late into the night with emails from Mike and scanned copies of the HOA's fraudulent filings. The deeper we dug, the uglier it got. Pine Ridge wasn't just sloppy, They were crooked to the core. Mike uncovered a trail of their misdeeds stretching back years, overcharging residents for community fees that mysteriously vanished, ignoring state building codes to cut corners, and bullying small landowners into selling cheap or losing their property to trumped-up violations. The real bombshell came when we found they'd built their precious estates on my land without a single wetland permit, a blatant violation of the Federal Clean Water Act. They'd also destroyed the creek's natural dam, a sturdy barrier of earth and stone I'd maintained since I was a kid helping my grandfather. That dam had kept the creek in check for decades, but Pine Ridge's bulldozers had turned it to rubble, leaving the development sitting in a floodplain like a sandcastle at high tide. A whistleblower's letter, slipped to us anonymously by a disgruntled ex-HOA board member, was the cherry on top. It detailed Linda's corruption in her own words, how she'd orchestrated the illegal annexation, pocketed kickbacks from contractors, and silenced anyone who asked questions. I saved photos of the demolished dam on my phone, each one a snapshot of their arrogance. Every night, I pored over those records, my anger hardening into resolve. This wasn't just about my land anymore. It was about every small property owner who'd been steamrolled by an HOA with too much money and not enough morals. I started seeing the flood risk not just as evidence, but as leverage. As an engineer, I knew water followed gravity, not promises. Over a greasy diner breakfast, I sketched a plan on a napkin. Clear the debris from the creek's upstream path, where I still had uncontested control. It was simple maintenance, perfectly legal under state law, but I knew what would happen when the next big rain hit. The creek would reclaim its natural course, and Pine Ridge Estates would get a front-row seat to nature's wrath. Mike loved the idea not for the waterworks but for the legal trap it set. They'll scream sabotage, he said, grinning, but they'll have to admit they built on your land to do it. He was already drafting a lawsuit that would hit like a freight train: trespass, fraud, environmental violations, and enough damages to make Linda's clipboard tremble. I spent days scouting the upstream creek, mapping every choke point where years of fallen branches and silt had clogged the flow. It was hard to look at. My grandfather and I used to clear that path together, him teaching me how water could be both friend and foe. Now it was my weapon. Mike's legal binder grew thicker, stuffed with expert reports on wetland destruction and emails from environmental agencies eager to nail Pine Ridge for their permit dodge. The whistleblower's letter sat in a locked folder, our ace in the hole. Linda thought she'd outsmarted me with her fancy lawyers and forged papers. She was about to learn I wasn't playing checkers, I was playing chess, and the board was about to get very, very wet. Linda thought she could pave over my rights. She didn't expect a flood of biblical proportions to wash her precious homes right back to reality. I gathered a small crew of old friends, guys who'd fished that creek with me as kids and knew the land like their own backyards. We spent a grueling weekend on the upstream portion of my property, where the creek still answered to me. Armed with shovels, work gloves, and sheer stubbornness, we cleared years of debris, tangled branches, silt, and rocks dumped by careless contractors. It was muddy, back-breaking work, but every scoop felt like reclaiming a piece of my family's legacy. I checked the weather app on my phone constantly. A major storm was brewing, set to hit in 48 hours. Legally, I was just maintaining a waterway on my land, as state law allowed, but I knew what was coming. The creek, freed from its chokeholds, would roar through Pine Ridge Estates like a freight train. When the storm rolled in, I watched from my cabin window, the sky dark as Judgment Day. Rain pounded the earth, turning the ground to soup. With the creek's path cleared, water surged along its original course, straight into the heart of the development. Streets became rivers, basements filled like bathtubs, and those manicured lawns Linda loved so much turned into mud pits. I flew my drone over the chaos, capturing footage of water tearing through Pine Ridge, houses sagging, cars half submerged, residents waiting in panic. Down at the development, Linda was a mess, screaming at contractors and waving her clipboard like it could stop the flood. The drone caught her red-faced and soaked, her authority dissolving with every gallon. Residents clustered in soggy groups, cursing the HOA for building on a floodplain and leaving them high and dry, or rather low and drenched. By morning, 58 homes were either underwater or battered beyond repair. Social media lit up with residents' fury, blaming Linda's shoddy planning. She tried to spin it, of course. A cease and desist letter arrived at my motel, accusing me of sabotaging the community by tampering with drainage. Linda claimed I'd caused the flood on purpose and threatened a countersuit. I laughed, showing the letter to Mike. Her desperation was showing. She'd have to admit the land was mine to make her case, and that was a trap she'd never escape. The drone footage, safely backed up, told the real story. Nature had simply followed the path her HOA had been too greedy to respect. Linda's empire was crumbling, and I was just getting started. Linda strutted into court thinking she'd intimidate me with her fancy lawyer. She didn't expect a judge to see right through her lies and award me a fortune. The county courthouse buzzed with tension as Mike and I filed our lawsuit. A legal sledgehammer aimed at Pine Ridge HOA. We charged them with trespass, fraud, property damage, environmental violations, and emotional distress. A litany of sins that could bury them. Our evidence was ironclad. My original deed, pulled from the lockbox in my truck, sat proudly among court exhibits, its faded ink screaming ownership. The drone footage of the flood, meticulously time-stamped, showed the creek reclaiming its path through the development, a natural consequence of the HOA's reckless construction. We had forged annexation documents, obtained through Mike's courthouse digs, proving Linda's crew had redrawn boundaries without a shred of authority. Expert testimony from an environmental engineer detailed how the HOA's destruction of wetlands and the creek's dam had turned Pine Ridge Estates into a disaster zone. Every piece was a nail in their coffin, and Mike was ready to swing the hammer. Pre-trial motions were a circus. Linda's high-priced lawyer, a slick city type with a tailored suit and a permanent smirk, tried to get our case tossed, claiming the HOA had acted in good faith and that my creek restoration was malicious sabotage. Mike countered with the whistleblower's letter, which stopped them cold. It outlined Linda's orders to bypass permits and forge documents, her signature practically glowing on every shady deal. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with steel-gray hair, raised an eyebrow at the lawyer's bluster and let our case move forward. I caught Linda glaring at me from across the room, her clipboard nowhere in sight. For the first time, she looked nervous, her polished facade cracking like the foundations of her flooded homes. Trial day packed the courtroom with Pine Ridge residents, their faces a mix of anger and desperation. Many had bought into Linda's luxury living pitch, only to find their homes unsellable, their basements swamps, and their savings gone. They whispered furiously in the gallery, their trust in the HOA shattered. Mike opened with a masterclass, laying out how Pine Ridge had stolen my 100 acres, built without permits, and ignored federal environmental laws. He projected my deed on a screen, its clear boundaries mocking the HOA's forged maps. The drone footage played next, drawing gasps as water tore through the development. Proof that the flood was no act of sabotage, but a direct result of the HOA's greed. Our environmental expert took the stand, explaining how the destroyed dam and filled wetlands had turned the land into a flood magnet. I testified last, keeping it simple. This was my family's land, my grandfather's legacy, and Pine Ridge had tried to erase it. I saw jurors nod, their eyes on me, not Linda. Linda's defense was a house of cards in a windstorm. Her lawyer leaned hard on the good faith argument, claiming the HOA believed the land was legally theirs. He painted me as a vengeful recluse who'd flooded the community out of spite. But Mike's cross-examination was brutal. He grilled Linda on the forged documents, producing emails where she'd personally approved the boundary changes. When asked about the missing wetland permits, she stammered, blaming clerical errors. The whistleblower's letter came out next, read aloud to a silent courtroom. Linda's face drained of color as her own words, detailing kickbacks and coercion, hung in the air. The lawyer tried to pivot, accusing me of tampering with the creek, but Mike produced state law proving my maintenance was legal. The judge's frown deepened with every dodge, and I knew we had them. The residents in the gallery turned on Linda mid-trial. One woman, her home still waterlogged, stood up and shouted, "You lied to us," before being ushered out. Others muttered, their loyalty to the HOA dissolving as they realized their dream homes were were built on stolen land and lies. Linda's lawyer tried to salvage things with a sob story about community needs, but the judge wasn't buying it. She leaned forward, her voice sharp, asking why the HOA hadn't verified ownership or permits. Linda had no answer, her usual smugness replaced by a deer-in-headlights stare. The courtroom felt electric, like the air before a storm. Fitting, given how water had brought us here. Closing arguments were a formality. Mike painted a vivid picture of a predatory HOA that had trampled my rights and endangered a community for profit. Linda's lawyer mumbled about unfortunate misunderstandings. But the jurors' faces told the story. They were done with excuses. After a short deliberation, the judge returned, her gavel poised like a guillotine. The verdict was a landslide. Pine Ridge HOA was guilty on all counts. The damages were staggering: millions for the land theft, environmental destruction, and punitive penalties for their bad faith. The HOA was ordered to remove every structure from my 100 acres at their expense and restore the land to its natural state. I held the court order in my hands, its weight like a trophy, as Mike clapped me on the back. Linda sat frozen, her empire in ruins, while residents stormed out, already talking lawsuits of their own. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt the sun on my face, lighter than I'd been in months. The gavel's crack still echoed in my ears, a sound as satisfying as the creek's roar during the flood. Linda had thought she could bully me into submission, but she'd underestimated what a man with a deed, a drone, and a damn good lawyer could do. My land was mine again, and the HOA's reckoning was just beginning. I glanced back at the courthouse, knowing the real cleanup, tearing down those 58 homes, would be even sweeter. Pine Ridge HOA thought they could pave over my legacy. Now they're paving their way out of my life, and I've got the last laugh with a bigger, better slice of paradise. Months after the verdict, my 100 acres were a hive of activity, but not the kind Linda had envisioned. The court order was a whip cracking over the HOA, forcing them to demolish all 58 homes and restore the land to its natural state. I stood at the property line, watching bulldozers tear into the cookie-cutter houses, their vinyl siding and fake shutters reduced to rubble. The air smelled of dust and diesel, a far cry from the pine-scented breeze I remembered. But it was progress. I'd insisted on overseeing every step, making sure the HOA didn't cut corners again. Wetlands were carefully rehabilitated, with native plants reintroduced under the guidance of an environmental crew. The creek, free from culverts, flowed clear and strong, its banks alive with reeds and frogs. At the entrance, I planted a new sign, Hopper Family Preserve Private. Its bold letters a warning to any future trespassers. The land was healing, and so was I. Linda's downfall was the talk of the town. Local news ran stories on her ouster from the HOA, her once pristine reputation now muddier than the flooded estates. Residents, furious over their ruined homes and drained bank accounts, hit her with personal lawsuits for fraud and mismanagement. Word was she'd sold her own house at a fire sale price to cover legal fees and skipped town, leaving behind a trail of unpaid bills and broken dreams. I didn't gloat. Not much anyway, but I couldn't help a quiet satisfaction knowing she'd never bully another landowner. The remaining Pine Ridge residents, humbled by the ordeal, started treating me differently. A few even stopped by with coffee or apologies, asking for advice on fighting their own HOA battles. I shared what I'd learned. Check your deeds, know your rights, and never trust a clipboard-wielding bureaucrat. The settlement money was a game changer. After covering Mike's fees and my costs, I had enough left to buy 50 acres of adjacent land, expanding my property to a sprawling 150 acres. It was a chance to build something new, not just for me, but for the future. I constructed a small family retreat on the new land, a sturdy fishing cabin with a wide porch, nestled among oaks and overlooking the creek. Inside, I hung a framed photo of my grandfather, his weathered face smiling down at the water he'd loved. The cabin was simple, with a stone fireplace and a few bedrooms for family visits, but it felt like home. I carved out nature trails winding through the property, their paths lined with wildflowers and benches for quiet moments. A portion of the land, 20 acres of pristine forest, I donated to a local conservation group, ensuring it would stay untouched forever. My grandfather's legacy wasn't just secure. It was growing, a living testament to what we'd fought for. I spent my days tending the land, often alone, but never lonely. The creek's gentle gurgle was company enough. And the occasional deer or hawk reminded me why I'd fought so hard. The lawsuit, the flood, the courtroom drama. It all felt distant now, like a storm that had passed. But the lesson stuck. I'd learned how far greed could push people and how fiercely you had to push back. The HOA had tried to erase my family's history, but I'd turned their own arrogance against them. Water, as my grandfather used to say, always finds its way. One evening, I sat on the cabin porch, fishing rod in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of fire. The air was cool, the kind that settles in your bones and makes you feel alive. I cast a line into the creek, its surface catching the last light like a mirror. Linda had wanted to build her dream neighborhood on my dirt, and I'd given her a waterfront view after all, just not the kind she'd expected. Water rights, it turned out, trumped HOA might every time. I chuckled, the sound blending with the crickets. The land was mine again, bigger and wilder than before, and no one would ever take it from me. I thought about the residents, the ones who'd lost their homes in the flood. Some had been as arrogant as Linda, but others were just folks caught in her web, dreaming of a place to call their own. I didn't wish them ill, but I didn't lose sleep either. They'd trusted the wrong people, and the creek had been a harsh teacher. My fight wasn't against them. It was against a machine that thought it could roll over anyone with a deed and a memory. That machine was broken now, and I'd helped break it. As the stars came out, I leaned back, rod resting on my knee. The preserve was more than land. It was a promise kept, a story carved into the earth. I imagined my kids, maybe their kids, walking these trails, fishing this creek, knowing what it took to hold on to something real. The HOA's bulldozers were gone, but my work wasn't done. I keep tending this place, keep telling its story, keep making sure no one forgot what happened when you tried to steal from a man who knew his rights. If you loved seeing this HOA get washed out by justice, hit that like button. Share this story with anyone battling overreaching HOAs or land disputes. Subscribe for more real-life revenge tales. And don't forget to ring that bell. Ever had a neighbor or HOA try to steal your property? Spill the details in the comments. I'm all ears.